Today we're going to go over market period 3, market period 4 material. I'm going to focus in on a couple items that, for the most part, on the tests, we haven't done that well on this year, and also give you a list similar to a review sheet of what you can study. I'm actually going to go to the very bottom of the page first to just go over some study tips for you before we move on, because I know this can seem daunting. We have a full year to cover in the final. But if you've reviewed a little bit by bit, it shouldn't be that bad. And for some of you, especially, you've been building on this knowledge. Government is one of those classes that things don't happen in isolation. It's hard to understand, for example, Social Security and the budget without understanding the fact that Congress has control of the purse and the president has to approve of that. They don't happen in the bubble, so they build on each other. So, a couple tips. I'm just going to read these for you. Um, a good strategy is to prioritize yesterday and today. Uh, it might be helpful to print this out and put numbers down on things that you know you have to review. Um, something you know the least about. And at the bottom of those numbers, however many they are, is what you know the most about. And what this means is that you really start at the top of the list, and you spend more time on those terms or concepts because you don't know them. And the ones that are at the very bottom, you don't really have to spend much time on because you know that you're aware. I would recommend that you study in 45 to 50-minute periods. Take a 10 to 15-minute break. Um, if you do this for a couple hours leading up to the final, you should be okay. Even once a day would be fine. But use that time, that 10 to 15-minute break, to take a walk, get a snack, something other than studying. Studying in groups also helps. Don't be afraid to ask a parent or a sibling if you can teach them about a concept or a key term. Um, if you have a friend that's in this class, whether it's maybe in a different level, even everyone's taking the same final. So even if someone's in an honors class, but you know someone at school who's taking this at the college prep level, don't be afraid to study with that person if you would like. Everyone's taking the same thing for the end of the year. Uh, and if that's the case, if you're studying in groups, ask each other to teach you the certain concepts or explain it, and you'll quickly understand whether you know it or not. Feel free to use the textbook outlines for review. Although the textbook itself will not be tested, many of the ideas that are communicated in the textbook will help you understand a term or a concept. Uh, when you go to take the final, and especially when you study, put yourself in a comfortable setting, no distractions. It might be easier for you to print off some of the lessons we had for review or textbook pages, but I would definitely put your phone away. At the very least, maybe turn it off. Just avoid some distractions. And lastly, if you have questions as we're talking about them, you could always come to homework help. I have daily homework help times. Check the front page for those times. Um, and the announcements to make sure there's not any schedule changes, and I'd be happy to review concepts with you. All right, so let's go to just the key terms and key phrases. You can go to the top of the page. I'm not going to review these right now. You could read them on your own. I will say the court cases are heavily tested on this, so make sure you are aware of these court cases. All right. Okay, if you hadn't had a chance to review some of those terms in this video, pause it and go back or just look down the page. So I'm going to go over a couple of key areas of review. Um, Reasons behind the First Amendment. This is one area that people were a little hazy on. Uh, it's not just so that you have rights. Any right we have is not for the sole purpose of having rights. They all have purposes behind them. So the First Amendment includes, in some ways, called the Thought Amendment, the freedom of the press, freedom of religion, which won't be tested on this, and freedom of speech, and the right to gather. And the real reasons behind it are, in many ways, since these are the thought amendments, are to encourage discourse, to make sure the best thoughts come out, and make sure the best ideas come out to promote human flourishing. It's also to oppose government or to make a better government. And some of those two ideas are linked. Key point: hate speech, offensive speech, or speech that is uncomfortable is protected. If you listen to the Justice Breyer podcast I put up a couple weeks ago, he made that very clear as a Supreme Court justice that um, we have to be comfortable with sharing uncomfortable speech because at the end of the day, someone, the majority, may be wrong and they might need to hear the truth, so to speak. That being said, where speech happens matters. Remember, forum analysis is the idea of is the idea that you don't have freedom of speech all the time in every area. There's certain degrees where you have more freedom of speech than others. So a public street corner, for example, would be the where someone has the most amount of freedom of speech to say really whatever they want, as long as there's a couple restrictions like clear and present danger or um, dangerous tendency speeches that we went over. But for the most part, and then someone's house, obviously, if they own that house, they have the most amount of freedom of speech there, um, even if in some ways if it's private. Media. There were a couple things here that we were a little off on. The biggest one is social media is not the media. And in other words, or at least social media is not journalism. So the news stories that you read on your social media feed, be it Twitter, Instagram, I don't really think there's anything on Snapchat, but Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook are not vetted by an editor. They're not vetted by a journalist. They're not corroborated with other individuals. The facts aren't confirmed. It's most of the time someone's own opinion. That's not journalism. Um, Nor are the stories in the right hand feed. Those are there because of your likes or dislikes, not because an editor went through them. Internet media, number two, is the fastest type of media. One thing we got wrong in the test this year was the idea between internet media and new media. Um, New media is really media that's come out in the last 10 years. It's exclusively online, so they kind of overlap with one another. But if you think about newspapers like the Washington Post or New York Times, for example, they have an online presence. In fact, their online presence is significantly growing while their paper copy in many ways is diminishing. Um, but they're not new media. They didn't come around in the last 10 years. They've been around for quite some time. All right, number three, bias. This was something often people cited as a problem with the media. It can be a problem. It depends how it manifests itself. It's a natural phenomenon, so everyone has their own biases that, for the most part, they can't control. So how a journalist sees a story, certain facts are going to to are going to be in print than others. However, when journalists and media outlets deliberately um, sweep aside certain facts or they deliberately try to paint a picture maybe through the use of sound bites or framing or priming a subject um, or only considering one point of view or one source, so to speak, then bias is a problem. So, for example, if a journalist was interviewing someone about a murder and they only went to go interview one person and they didn't check what that person said against anyone else, well, then that would be a problem. And it would be certainly an example of unethical journalism. Okay. So key distinction there on bias. If you just say bias in of itself is a problem, well, it's not. It's something you have to be aware of, but not something that uh, presents as could lead to bad journalism per se. And that lastly, for fake news is primarily a problem of social media. Um, it's primarily produced in the social media atmosphere due to the confirmation bias. However, it is not actively uh, produced by media outlets. So while news outlets may be incredibly biased at times, that doesn't mean what they're putting out is entirely false. It might not be the full picture, but fake news would be a different stretch. And lastly, interest groups. Um, just want to highlight a couple differences between interest groups and political parties. So interest groups are there to, in many ways, to promote what they want on a certain issue. So it could be a cleaner environment. It could be limited government in the marketplace. They're more concerned with issue advocacy than they are with winning elections, which is what political parties want. And political parties want to run the country in a certain way. Interest groups, while they may want the country run in a certain way, it's particularly narrow. They do contribute money to candidates at various levels of government, but they do not run or pick candidates themselves. Political parties do. Obviously, when it comes to elections and campaign finance, interest groups have a large role, but for the most part, everyone can identify with an interest group. In some ways, they're a natural process of people being involved in democratic society. You know, like-minded individuals are going to group together on issues just like they do with political parties. So that wraps up today's review. If you have any questions about some of the areas we went over, or you're looking at the key terms and concepts and you're unclear of what one is, feel free to reach out to me. A lot of you have been giving me Google Drive or Google Doc review sheets. You're welcome to fill out those key terms and review. I won't be giving extra credit this time because it's really part of this. Your should be part of your daily work for preparation for this final. But I will obviously, if you've been doing that all year, make comments on that document so long as it's given provided to me by June 4th. Okay. Hope you guys have a great day. Talk to you soon.